we're live. Let's go.
Thanks, Alex. Welcome, everybody, to Office Hours 19. I very nearly called it 20, but we'll hold the celebrations off for the 20th session to next week. We've got quite a lot to get through today, including coverage of the latest release of GraphNode, which came out about an hour or two ago. We've got Adam from Edge and Node to talk about that a bit later. But to start off with, we'll go through our usual Node Watch piece. There's a lot going on in the Ethereum node space or the client space rather, because of the preparations for the London upgrade. Ropsten is on the 24th of June. That's the first one coming up, so that's in a couple of days. Gurley is on the 30th of June, and then Rinkeby on the 7th of July after that. So I would expect we will get a mainnet date sometime between those three being upgraded. Geth has a new release, Voyager Cluster, which released a few days ago in preparation for the London upgrade. And they've enabled SnapSync by default now, and their baseline is something in the region of a 7-hour sync, given enough storage and compute resources. There's a link to that release in the documents. I've posted the agenda in the Office Hours chat.
I have a question. Is the snapshot thingy working only for full nodes, or did they add it to archive as well?
As far as I know, it's only for full nodes, but unless anybody knows any different.
Cool, I thought they changed it.
Can you imagine syncing an archive node in 7 hours?
You can do that with TurboGeth though.
We'll get there, won't we? When they add that BitTorrent feature.
Yeah.
When they add that BitTorrent feature, it's going to be absolutely fantastic for resyncing. Yeah. Open Ethereum have made a new release, and it's really just an incremental release candidate, but it's important we cover it because there's an instruction that the previous RC that we reported last week, 330 RC1, is deprecated and should not be used. And 330 RC2 was released in the last few days. Nothing particularly interesting to report on that one. They were already ready for the London upgrade, just a few changes to fix some issues with RC1. Aragon, there's another release of Aragon that came out a few days ago. So that's June the 4th alpha. So they've made, I guess, which is a pretty significant change to the way that the chain data is being stored on the file system. Previously, we were using LMDB, and I believe there was a switch where you could choose that to be MDBX instead. The team has now removed LMDB support from Aragon and has no plans to go back to LMDB at any point. And it's recommended, if you haven't already done so, to migrate and resync using MDBX if you haven't already been using it. Now, my understanding is if you're running anything recent, relatively recent, and you've been syncing on a recent release, then you're already on MDBX. I don't know if anyone here can confirm that, but that's my understanding from a brief read of the Discord. Yeah,
that should be the case.
So I think it only really impacts you if you've been running a long-term TurboGeth node and you need to, they're thinking about upgrading, then you'll need to do a full resync.
The last couple of releases have had MDBX as default. If you boot your Aragon node, the startup logs will tell you what you're running, so you can check if you need to resync.
Perfect. Is there anything interesting between the two? Like, is there a TLDR between the two that, Chris, do you know the two different methods of storing the data in any depth, or why they've chosen to move to MDBX?
Not in depth, but MDBX is actually just an evolution of LMDB. So they've, kind of in rigorously using it, discovered some bugs which got reported to the LMDB team and then ultimately got rolled into MDBX. And generally, it's just more resilient. Things like the startup migrations happen with a locked database to prevent, any corruption or like issues that might arise from unlocked migration. So nothing, huge, other than it being an evolution of LMDB.
Okay, thanks. That's useful. Thank you. Steak Machine sends his apologies. He's not with us this week to update us on what he's been doing in the Aragon space. I don't think Chris is here. No. Has anybody else been doing any testing this week on Aragon that they want to talk about?
Yeah, we just started syncing the 0604 alpha. Apparently it's fixing the EIP 1898 thingies, and I'll keep you guys posted once our nodes are in sync, because we started syncing them from scratch yesterday, and yeah, it should be fixed. The issues should be fixed, but yeah, I'll let you guys know.
So this is about call by block versus call by hash, is that right?
Yeah, the stuff they converting and not letting the RPC know that through the RPC that the chain has reset back to the actual chain head. Right now I think it sends an error once it reverts back. I'm not entirely sure. I have to dig deeper into the logs.
Does this tie in? I've still got a reminder at the bottom here, Alex, from last week, where we talked about an yet to be resolved critical thinking issues. Does that play into this at all, or is this a separate?
Yeah, this basically fixes the issues, but again, I have to test it myself and figure out if it indeed fixes it.
Okay, so there's no point in anyone who's happens to be running TurboGuest nodes in production to start that resync process yet.
Well, I think you can upgrade.
Reindex, sorry.
Oh, reindex. Yeah, I mean, we need to confirm it, but it would be nice if we have multiple people trying to see if the problem occurs. But that implies anyone who runs Aragon nodes in production, they need to actively check their POIs every couple of days on chain to figure out if they get forked off.
Absolutely. I haven't heard anyone else mention that they're running the TurboGuest nodes, but this at least can be a record. If there's any indexers out there that are using TurboGuest nodes in production, then you need to be aware of this problem. Keep on top of it. We'll keep talking about it every week until it's officially resolved in the client, and we'll probably talk about it a week after that as a reminder too for everyone, and then we'll let it settle.
Yeah, this actually makes me wonder if people are not running TurboGuest at all, or if they're not checking their POIs at all. One of those should be the case. I hope not the latter.
I suspect it's a mixed bag, really. That's another discussion, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
That was everything I had for Ethereum clients. Is there anything anyone else wants to discuss in the client space? All right, let's move on to Repo Watch. Again, Goldberg's not with us, so luckily we have a major release of GraphNode that has been released today, and I've invited Adam, product manager from Edge and Node, to join us and talk a little bit about what's changed between version 0.22 and 0.23. So Adam, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm definitely going to be showing up to these more regularly. I joined, I guess, Edge and Node a couple of months ago. But yeah, so focused on working with the GraphNode team, who you all know very well. I guess shall I just give a bit of the context? We discussed this briefly yesterday, Jim.
Yeah, that would be perfect. Just a bit of a discussion about what are the major changes that we're going to see, or what sort of refactoring has been done. I know there's been a lot of refactoring work done, so maybe just talk through what's different and what it sets us up for the future.
Sure. Yeah. So I think like the overarching thing, important thing that we want to move towards is more regular releases in general, and getting into a bit more of a sort of frequent cadence of like smaller changes. Not that there are any sort of like huge changes in this release. Like I think, as you said, there's been some refactoring. So a lot of the work that the engineers have been doing has been essentially like extracting a lot of the Ethereum specific concepts out of GraphNode. So like in sort of readiness for supporting the other chains that were announced a couple of months ago. So that's been a big piece of work. But yeah, like from an Ethereum indexing perspective, what that really means is that at startup there's just a bunch of migrations that'll happen that should hopefully go off without a hitch, but it doesn't actually really change things. There are some other like quite specific things that have changed. So one was an environment variable, which I think contributed to some like POI issues, the sort of graph ETH call by number. So that's actually the same ETH EIP 1898 issue that there have been some problems with Aragon. So that's one thing. Supporting IPFS versions larger than 0.4. So this is a thing where the hosted service and a bunch of the IPFS nodes that we've been using have been tagged as quite low version, and this new version of GraphNode allows GraphNode to connect to those higher versions. And that's actually something where we want to, in general, upgrade IPFS across the network. Because I know there are some other nodes that indexes connect to, and so that's an area where we'll need indexes to upgrade to the latest version if we want to boost those IPFS versions, which should then improve sort of response times and peering and those kind of things. So that's one big change, and there are a bunch of sort of smaller things, some just improved performance, so particularly on POI, and then I think Graphman, I don't know if you saw that note in the release notes, is a sort of CLI tool for managing subgraphs, and there are a couple of features in there which I think have been added, which one in 0.22.
The Graphman piece is really interesting. After you explained to me yesterday the capability of that tool, I imagine us as indexers spending a lot of time using that in the future, where we might have the ability to rewind to a certain block on a subgraph and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Payne,
Yes.
you mentioned it as well. Have you been using it in Anger, Payne, in any of your work?
No, unfortunately, I was using the 0.22 release, which didn't have the Graphman, so I ended up using a script made by Luther that basically rewinded the whole database instead of just one to a certain block, and it was a pain in the butt. So my hopes is that Graphman rewind will be a really good function to for us to use in case of emergencies.
Yeah, for sure, and I think the plan is to continue to adding this kind of functionality. So I think like it obviously started out as commands that we've needed, like managing subgraphs, like initially on the hosted service, which have then been sort of rolled into general functionality because they obviously have general usage.
I have a question though for you, Adam, if you know, probably should be addressed to Luther. Is the Graphman rewind function going to also delete the ETH cache?
I don't know the answer to that, but yeah, I can come back to you or follow up with him.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Let's see.
Any other questions around the new release that people want to ask? I certainly want to. I would like to say, at least this is my opinion, that I wouldn't recommend updating until we've had the networks.md document updated. Adam, I assume that's imminent.
Yep. So we'll be updating that, and yeah, there'll be sort of an announcement on Discord at around the same time, and then also want to just like start a thread on the forum just to track this, like I guess over like so there's a place where people can go to sort of see if hopefully there are no issues, but yeah, expect that I guess today or maybe tomorrow.
Perfect. So indexers, look out for that before you don't jump the gun on the upgrade. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Adam, the changes relating to IPFS flakiness, does this kind of put us on a track that would enable indexers to run their own IPFS nodes, and is that the kind of general direction we're aimed at?
Yeah, so the version 0.4, like I think is that version of IPFS is not able to, I think, peer communicate with nodes above 0.7. So I think that just means, yeah, that essentially, it just meant that in terms of fetching data from the network or propagating data to the network, I think that was a severe limitation. The goal is obviously for there to be less dependence on that sort of single IPFS node. So it's a path towards that. Like I think there is a bit of a concerted thing where we'll need everyone to sort of upgrade because like if we want to upgrade our own IPFS nodes, and I think that so like I'll provide a bit more detail on those steps and like any timings or requirements there. But the goal is obviously for folks to be able to run their own IPFS nodes.
Cool.
That in itself is a very interesting topic. I personally don't have a great deal of experience running IPFS nodes, although I do run one on my desktop. From the last time I was playing around with IPFS, and it gets used all the time when I'm browsing websites with IPNS. So I think if this becomes a feature where it's yet another piece of the puzzle that we could host ourselves, then I'd be interested if there's anyone here who is sort of well versed in IPFS and wants to talk about it from first principles in terms of, here's how it might look like for an indexer to deploy their own node, then please reach out to me and we'll look at doing something in terms of a chat on office hours or documentation or something along those lines. Adam, thanks very much. Appreciate your input. Cohen, did you have a question?
No, to say I'm running an IPFS node for my standalone indexer, so the old version that is still compatible. I think one of the most important things to know is that you need to set up for a server environment if you're not hosting your servers at home, because otherwise you'll get abuse complaints from your provider, because it will connect all the internal networks and it will look like you're trying to port scan or DDoS or whatever. That's one of the main gotchas of IPFS that I'm aware of.
It makes Hetzner mad.
Sorry?
Yeah, it makes Hetzner go mad at you if you enable it. Yeah, definitely don't do that.
Interesting.
Well, for those kind of reasons, I started blocking LAN-related traffic just in general, and then trying to configure the software as it should run. But there's always something that sort of slips through, or there's always a risk. So I started including in my firewall rules that it blocks outgoing traffic that are generally LAN IP addresses, the private subnetworks, and that avoids a lot of problems.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I would want to understand that architecture a little bit more about why it would be doing something like that. I mean, is it using, does IPFS use libp2p or something else?
I think it does, and it announces the fact that it's online to all of the peers that it finds in your local network. So this is why Hetzner goes mad at you if you do it, because it sends requests to all the networks in your private network.
Of course. Right, okay.
And it's probably not Hetzner only. It's probably happening on a lot more other data centers.
So there's a nature of what that looks like to a stateful in IDS, whatever, intrusion detection system. Mm-hmm. Looks like malicious traffic. Exactly. A bot network or something along those lines. That's interesting.
Yeah, when I started setting IPFS up, it was quite clear in the docs that if you're running this stuff in a data center, you should run it, I think, with server flag or something like that, and then it will avoid doing that sort of behavior. But it's quite an important flag to include in your startup or in your configuration file.
Yeah.
But you're only using it right now for standalone indexer, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, because I need to store the subware file somewhere.
Your own, for the right. Okay, so you need them. It's another way of getting them, say, the metadata for whatever subgraphs you're indexing on whatever network.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jim, before we move on, I would like to point out that certain metrics have been changed. If you go onto the release notes and you scroll all the way down, you'll see a bunch of things that have changed, and some databases need to be, some dashboards need to be updated after upgrading to 0.23.
Very
and
very good point.
Yeah, and it's perfect because we just done upgrading ours, so we need to do it again.
Yeah. Okay. So deployment block behind is the big one because that's in this standard vanilla indexing dashboard that came all the way from Cubes back in the early days, right?
Yeah. And you
Chain
have
head
to do
numbers.
manually to see the blocks number behind to do the calculation. So yeah, that's
Okay.
one thing.
I
Okay.
know we have moved on from this section, but worth noting, just in terms of release notes, the latest Aragon release does add a trace compat flag, and yeah, some of the research that Chris from Torrential and a bunch of people involved have been doing found that some of the trace call results and generally the RPC results from Open Ethereum are like questionably the right results, and Aragon may actually be serving the correct results. So this trace compat flag basically just has Aragon serve like for like data with Open Ethereum. So that may be
Oh.
Oh crap! I think I'm syncing that without the flag.
I think sync doesn't matter there. It will likely just be an option that changes how the response is structured and transformed. So I don't think it will affect syncing. But at least given that GraphNode expects Open Ethereum responses as the kind of canonical truth, we should probably be passing that flag.
Okay.
Deep philosophical question, that one, Chris. Whether that really is the canonical or not, I think.
I totally agree with you, and we probably need to evolve that definition, but at least for now, that flag probably makes sense to pass.
Can you explain why would there be any differences in the way it handles the trace calls?
I would direct you to the tracing channel in the Aragon Discord, where Alexei speaks a little bit about specific cases. And I think in our own Aragon channel, Stake Machine dropped a link to an issue that Alexei posted that actually shows some trace filter diffs that, actually give you the diff of how the answers are different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, how do you? I don't know how to call it. How do you know which one is the right one?
So that's the deep philosophical question, Alex, that we are conveniently skipping over, right? And we don't have much choice right now but to skip over that. But it is a deep philosophical question about which is, what is reality? Let's go that. Let me just stop there.
You are turning into Juan with his philosophical question of what is a subgraph.
Oh, it's way worse than that. It's way worse than that. Well, that's very helpful, Chris, because I actually read that changelog, that line on the changelog, and I just could not understand actually what it meant. I understood it meant doing something to do with traces, but now I fully understand. So it's basically making it behave like Open Ethereum.
I love the fact
that it returns.
I love the fact that it includes bugs.
Yeah, bug for bug compatibility.
What a world we live in. Okay, so let's move on to. I want to give Ford a chance. Ford, if there's anything you're working on you want to talk about in the last week or so. If not, that's cool.
Sorry, I just had to unmute. I'm trying to focus as much as I can. There's a lot going on, but on getting the transaction management really honed in. So I had an update, I think 2 weeks ago, that made a really big improvement to handling reverts, but I'm still seeing, as I monitor the network, a pretty good amount of transactions that are being reverted. I think because of the timeout issue from ethers.js, but that's the current focus right now. And I'm hoping in the next week we can reduce all the transaction reverts to as few as possible and only see them when people are running old software would be the goal.
Cool. I guess for me, the inexperience of the reversions, I'm actually less worried. I'm less concerned right now about the gas, because generally gas has been very low. It's the amount of time you have to spend waiting for pending transactions if you don't want to actually try and manually edit them, so to speak. I remember it was, I don't know, sometime it was like 3 a.m. at some point, and I was like, wow, okay, this is a great time to, settle my allocations. So I thought, well, I'll do this. I'll be done in 20 minutes. There's only 10 transactions. Like 6:30 in the morning, and I'm staring at reverted transactions, wondering when they might start or waiting for pending transactions to revert. So I'm really looking forward to a fix to that.
Yeah, I'm trying to make it so it's as robust as possible and as quick as possible without also wasting you gas. It's there's a lot of subtleties there, but I think we're getting close.
Is the core of the problem the fact that gas is so low that the difference between the different speeds of transactions is so small compared to when the gas fees are higher, or is that just irrelevant?
Yeah, I think that's coming up a little bit. I think probably most of you noticed someone reported that gas estimate of like 1 gwei last week. So clearly
it was 1 wei.
Oh yeah, not even. Yeah, so there's clearly some inconsistencies in some of the ETH clients. I think that was a Geth client on an older version, and that's coming up. But I think the major issue is a callback in ethers.js library that I basically use for timeouts to detect if a transaction is taking too long. That works almost all the time, but there's a few cases where a transaction will be successful, but the callback doesn't return. So our code thinks that it wasn't successful, and then it tries it again, and that reverts because the original one actually was successful. So the contract reverts it, and then we get into a weird state. So I'm going to be potentially working with the Ethers.js team to try to work that bug out.
Cool. Go on, Chris?
All right, Jim. Just to comment on the 1 wei transaction pricing issue, that's actually a result of, as Ford said, like the estimate gas calls to the ETH clients returning that value, and that actually has been happening because of Flashbots bundles, because those bundles actually set a gas price of 0. And that's confused some of the clients. So most of them have been updated. So the latest version of Geth accounts for that. But some of the providers, like Infura, is still running 1 version behind. So they haven't incorporated that fix yet. So that's where that issue is coming from.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's great color. Ford, is there anything you need from us in terms? I know you've obviously got all the on-chain data, but should we be capturing logs for you? If we are experiencing reversions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, anytime you guys see stuff like this, I'd love to get logs. I do have like a good amount of information already to get started, but any data points are helpful. So yeah, I appreciate indexer agent logs. And maybe paired with Etherscan transaction links if you have them.
Got it. Yeah, we can do that.
Another thing that I need to double check if it's open source now, but I want to share with you guys the debugging tools I created. I made some Jupyter notebooks for analyzing POI tables, identifying divergence, and then also polling entity changes and Ethereum call cache changes on those blocks to debug exactly why. I've mentioned this in other office hours, but this is basically automating the investigation that I posted about on the forum for the P2P dispute. So I'll reach out to you guys like this week, but I think that could be useful tools for you guys if you're debugging POI divergence.
For sure. Do you want to do we could dedicate a half hour to one of the, recently future, one of the next few office hours, so you could maybe show it to us?
Yeah, that'd be great. If people are interested, I'd love to do a quick demo.
Yeah, I'm most definitely interested. I'd like to see that. Yeah, and I'm sure more people would.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, where are we at? Is there any other PRs or anything software related anyone wants to bring up? If not, we will move on to a little bit of talking about what's going on in the migration world. Last week we had the announcement that the traffic on mainnet is now mostly real production traffic. Some of you might remember back when the traffic, there was a period where Janus said he was dialing down the traffic on mainnet in terms of the number of queries per second, but what was actually happening was production traffic was starting, or we were left with primarily production traffic on I think 8 of the subgraphs for now, and the other ones are still testing. So we've got production query traffic now for Audius, Dodo, LivePeer, MStable, Open, Pull Together, Reflexer, and UMA protocol. And I've put a link to the blog announcement in the agenda if you want to take a look at it. On the query fee side, we went quite in depth last week on query fee dynamics, on how everybody's performing, the challenges we have in pulling that data, and the challenges that we have around optimizing for improved rebate efficiency. And since then, I started a small chat group with those who have been contributing in that space in the Discord indexer chat to start having a more serious discussion about it, and also to get a working group off the ground that would meet on a regular basis to discuss these things. And it's been no fun at all trying to get that group of people together because they're all over the world. But what we've settled on is, for now, is 2 p.m. PST on Fridays, which is a funky time, but it's the only one that works for some of the most critical people in terms of contribution in that group. This group is, I'm going to ask Martine to add it to the Foundation calendar, info at graph.foundation, if you want to add that to your own calendar so you can see it. And Martine, can I presume that anyone with that can add themselves or invite themselves to the meeting? Am I right thinking that?
The calendar is public, so anyone can see it. But to add themselves to an invite, probably, DM me or something.
Right, okay. So that meeting is going to start not this week, but the week after. Anybody's welcome to come. It's not recorded. If you're contributing, then we'll add you to the group discussion at some point in that group discussion, once we, because we're spending a lot of the time just talking specifically about query fee stuff. I don't want to flood the indexer channels with that, but at some point we'll break back into the main chat. The objectives of that working group are twofold. One is to figure out, well, it's 3 things really. The first thing is to truly understand how the basic model that we've seen in a spreadsheet for revenue share actually works on the network, because it's far more complex than, just a spreadsheet with one subgraph's worth of revenue share information in it. Is far more complex. The second thing is to figure out a robust way of collecting that data, which is very much being worked on right now. And the third piece is then to understand how we should be behaving in terms of maybe changing up our allocation ratios or fee allocation ratios, so that collectively everybody makes more of the rebate. So collectively our rebate efficiency increases. And what we're learning quite quickly is it's not as simple as it looks like, as it looks on a simple spreadsheet with the Cobbs-Douglas function on it. It's far more complex than that. That's not this Friday coming, but the Friday after, 2 p.m. PST. It'll be in the Foundation calendar, and anyone is welcome to join. It won't be a recorded session. Testnet. So Testnet is continuing to run with a very high QPS at the moment. Personally, I've got 2 indexers running on there with a total of around 2,500 QPS. But I think it's probably running at something between 5,000 and 7,000 QPS right now. So if you're looking to give yourself a little bit of a stress test, then the testnet is the place to do it right now. Anyone got anything else they want to talk about with regards to migration?
Do we have an idea of the total QPS on mainnet right now?
I don't think anything has been shared. Not that I've seen. Anyone else? I think probably
I don't have recent numbers. I think like last week, it was almost 1 million a day from the production apps, and then a bunch more from the test traffic.
Right.
1 million a day is, I think, 10 per second.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the answer really is it's a lot lower than it was during the simulation, and so everybody who's very concerned about their QPS, you probably should be a little less concerned right now. And I imagine also, playing with your prices within reason is probably not going to be making much of a difference right now either. If the share of queries is that, the pool of queries per second is quite low.
Yeah, 1 million per day is 11.6 QPS.
11.6.
Yeah.
That was close.
Close enough. Right. Something else there, Cohen? Sorry. Okay. Let's move on. I've got something here I just wanted to talk about that I announced in the Indexer chat last week, I think. Stefan, myself, and Oliver have been working on Graph Academy related stuff. And one of the things that I'm doing is I'm trying to sort of make the Graph Academy the place to go, or the place that we refer people to for Indexer related technical documentation. So the documentation doesn't necessarily have to live on Graph Academy, but it would be referenced at Graph Academy. The reason for this is it just makes sense for us to have a central place to refer people to. So what we're doing is, if you take a look at the link that I've provided, that links directly to the Graph Gitbook. Gitbook is a GitHub repository-backed documentation platform. So you've got all of the attribution of using GitHub in order to present your documents in a relatively nice and structured fashion. So we're just pulling things in there and attributing all of the content to each indexer that decides they want to contribute with a little panel that has a couple of links to your socials or whatever you would like to give you some visibility in terms of other people looking at the content. Nobody came back to me last week, so I'm going to start reaching out to people specifically that I know have developed tools and documentation to see if you'd be interested in putting your stuff on Graph Academy. And it doesn't have to be, the Bible to indexing. That's really not what we're looking for from people. It can be anything from a full, end-to-end document on deploying an indexer in a certain environment through to like a tip on how to do a specific type of monitoring. I've got one up there for ETH node monitoring, and it's really, really simple, but really impactful, if you're looking for a way to monitor whether your infrastructure is at the chain head or not. And we also want to promote the use of your existing documentation. So, when I go and have a look at Stake Machine's automation work that he's been doing as part of his grant, he has a README on his repo. So all we really need to do is transplant, clone that over to Gitbook, and then you can always refer people there, and it will eventually take them to the repo. So we'd be encouraging you to submit, even if all you've got is a README, and we can work from there. What's more important is what's behind the README, if it's a good tool or not. So I've listed out a few things here, like a few names out the top of my head of stuff that I know people are working on. But if there's anything else anyone is aware of that someone's working on and they might like to contribute, then please do let me know.
Just a little bit off topic, but still on the topic of indexers and the Graph Academy. I've sent some few people to learn about the graph during the weekend, and they all asked me the same question about, I'm going to share a screenshot on the chat. So when they got to the question of what is an indexer, nobody quite understands what is an indexer, because in the paragraph they explain how the indexer makes rewards. So I think maybe, I don't know, it's something that we have to take a look at it and maybe improve it a bit.
For sure.
But it says quite it says quite clear here that indexers select subgraphs from the network to index. Customers, typically end users, query the index data by paying their metered usage based on whatever. Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, but why, right? The question is more about framing. That on its own doesn't tell somebody who knows nothing about the graph protocol why an indexer exists, right? Why does an indexer exist? They exist in order to provide data to consumers, and then you need to provide context around that. So I think there's definitely some validity to what Joe is suggesting there. Stefan,
we have created. Yeah, we have created also a section called the Graph Ecosystem Participants, and they explain all the major roles that we have, delegators, curators, more at a high level sort of term. So that in that context might be the better content to share. But nonetheless, I think we can also, duplicate some information, right? Across the site, maybe repeat some of the information, something we can look into.
From my side, when someone is asking me that they want to learn about the graph, what I'm doing is always sending them to the Graph Academy. I think this is like where everything converges. So if I could just share a comment that someone commented on the screenshot that I've just sent you. He told me, I understand that they exist and they get paid, but I don't know what they do. So this was one of the comments of the people that I've sent them there.
So when you say what they do, I mean, isn't something like, they run servers and these servers are, indexing, that type of information. Is that the sort of level that they're maybe thinking about, Joe?
Yeah, I guess so. Like what they actually do, like we all know exactly what's happening, but for someone getting being new on the graph, I don't think they have quite an idea of subgraphs and everything.
Got it. Stefan can't join us right now, but I'm sure he's listening to the feedback, and myself, Oliver, and Stefan can have a talk about reviewing that, definitely.
Yeah, so what I was referencing earlier, Joseph, is in fact also a paragraph on the Graph Academy, just in the different sections, where we describe indexers as node operators in the graph network who stake GRT in order to provide indexing and query processing services. So, and then it goes on with a couple more sentences, but that's the kind of information I think you're looking for. So that's just about us organizing it and referencing it in a way that folks can easily find it.
Yeah, it's that user journey piece, right? When they hit the website, where do they first go? And that takes them down a funnel. And if they've gone down that funnel, maybe they don't get to the piece where we've done the job correctly. Maybe in this case, they've gone down the funnel that takes them to somewhere where there's an assumed level of knowledge. So we probably need to work on the user path through the website. I defer to my marketing friend Stefan for that sort of stuff. Okay, unless there's any other questions or feedback, we'll move on to. We have 15 minutes left. I've got a very long governance set of points to discuss. Just wonder if maybe we should prioritize something here. Yeah, okay, so the first two. So the snapshot vote for the arbitration charter closed about 10 days ago, 11 days ago, and the vote was almost unanimously yes for the charter and for the other. There was a few other auxiliary GIPs put in as part of that vote. We had just under 1 billion weighted GRT participating in the vote, representing 189 individuals. So there was only one account, in fact, that voted no to the snapshot. So that proposal, or sorry, that GIP, I believe now is pending approval at the council. The next council meeting is next week, next Tuesday, I believe. So I expect this will be part of the voting that's going on in that meeting. Moving on to some preliminary GAPs and some proposals. We'll see how far we get through this, but we might not get very far, because I'd like to have a discussion around an upcoming quality of life improvement for both indexers, delegators, and everybody really, in terms of understanding how cuts work for the indexers staking and the delegators delegating. Ariola Edge and Node has put together a preliminary GIP around a proposal that Gavin from Figment, one of the first proposals, was introduced on the forums. So this proposal would change the way that the cut system works quite radically. It would bring us more in line with traditional proof of stake networks, where you set a cut and your cut is set and it doesn't change no matter what the dynamics might be around the stake you have delegated to you or your self stake or whatever. So what would this mean? It would mean that indexers no longer need to, assuming they opt in, they would no longer need to constantly tweak their cuts in order to maintain an effective cut, which is what a lot of indexers are doing today. And that process in itself can often confuse delegators about indexers' intentions. So if this was to be put into place, then the delegators would have a much more intuitive and clear understanding of what their indexers will charge now and in the future. And it also means that the use of the delegation parameter cooldown function would be more intuitive. And this is where I wanted to sort of open discussion, is I believe that the cooldown function, even with this proposal in place, still isn't really that useful and is really just theater in the way that it works today. So I've proposed a couple of things, and I posted just recently on the link here. I've got the link here in the agenda, additional fixes. I've proposed a couple of additional things that we might do. I'd be interested to hear what people think. So the first thing that I proposed was that we have a discussion about how the cooldown period works today and see if there's anything that we could do to improve it. Keeping in mind that we're going to have potentially this different way of expressing cuts in the near future. And the second thing I wanted to propose was harking to some other protocols where they have some more restrictive features around commission. So on Cosmos, they have this concept of a commission rate, which is, this is what would be our effective cut in the graph world. And then they have a max rate, which is a ceiling on the cut that an indexer could take, in our case, in the context of the graph. So that's set in stone, essentially. It can only ever be reduced on Cosmos. It cannot be increased. And then we also have a final parameter called the max change rate. And the max change rate as well is defined when these validators on Cosmos are registered. It cannot be increased. It can only be decreased. And the max change rate basically means that you can only increase your commission, or the indexer can only increase their commission by that rate per day. So in this case, in the example I provided, the staking facilities is a validator on Cosmos, they can only change their max rate at 1% per day. They can only change their rate of commission by 1% per day, and they have a max rate ceiling of 25%. So my argument is that this swings the pendulum in terms of fairness, maybe not the right word, but this swings the pendulum more towards giving delegators some security that indexers can't fleece them in some way or be dishonest with them about their cuts. So I've already had a brief discussion with Oliver about this. So Oliver, I'd like to open the discussion first to you, and maybe if you could recap your opinion on this.
Yeah, so just adding on, I think it's also worth noting that the definition of what the cut is somewhat changed in the proposal. So it's not anymore the cut relative to the total allocation amount. It really takes the indexer share already out. So by default, it's almost like a two-step sort of process. The default is the initial ratio of indexer to delegator stake is taken into account, and the indexer essentially gets their share. So if you have 20% self-stake relative to the total allocation, then that's what you get. If it changes to 30, you don't have to go back and then make the changes accordingly. That is already given, so to say. So the cut only becomes the rate of the delegator amount that you essentially then would set as your sort of like indexer operations fee, admin fee, however you want to look at that. So I think that's important to understand. What I would have concerns with something like Cosmos, where you have sort of this hard cap of incremental changes that you can do, is that indexer rewards today are really the main source of income. And as such, they're really tied, the level of revenue is today really tied to the fiat price of GRT. And that can fluctuate quite heavily, which also means that indexers, and thinking especially about the smaller indexers, might have a need, to make more drastic changes in certain situations. And if they're restricted to do so, they could, in a worst case scenario, face existential threats. So that sort of hard cap would be probably concerning to me. Would be interested to see what other indexers think about that. But I do think that there could be a sort of combination and taking in other ideas that we've had in forum discussions, say around thawing periods, for example. If we have more of a soft cap where we say, if an indexer were to change the rate more than X%, then the delegators have the opportunity to undelegate instantly for X number of days, right? If it goes above a certain threshold. So now it becomes more of a way where indexers can still do it, but then just face ramifications in different ways.
I share the concern that adding these kind of additional restrictive properties may, contribute to indexes getting into a position that may mean they face, real crisis. I think there's a wider question to ask about how we approach protocol level changes like this. Generally, I think smaller changes and changes that are, I guess, minimizing the number of variables within any given protocol change makes sense to me. And at least up until this point, I feel that the cooldown period has largely been unused because I think generally what indexes want to adjust their parameter to is an effective cut. But because of the wildly, varying amount of delegation and that hugely varying the effective cut in the current system, indexes just haven't been able to use that cooldown.
Yeah, I agree. If we just go back to Ariel's written GIP draft on its own, I think it's already far superior to the status quo. because
Agreed.
it gives indexers now a way to just set the effective cut without having to watch their delegation amounts on a daily basis, right? It stays the same, so that's awesome. And also for the delegators, it is now much more transparent to them when an indexer has 5% cut, indexer A, indexer B might have 10% cuts, then you can now genuinely say indexer B is twice as expensive in terms of delegation as indexer A is. So you would instantly make that conclusion. You can do that, which you can't do today. So I think just Ariel's proposal in and of itself is already better.
Yeah, so I think my vote would be for implementing the kind of minimum viable set of changes, which, to me seems like changing the meaning of the cut parameter to be effective cut, and then assessing how, that change manifests in indexer and delegator behavior in the real world before trying to solve for problems that we're not sure will actually, manifest in the network, and create a lot of significant technical work and audit requirements and just risk that I don't think we need to take on until we, have validated that that's the case.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I just want to sort of clarify the reason I bring this up is because, from my point of view, without the technical experience to understand the implications of making this change to the smart contracts, it looks like potentially the right time to fit something in on top, right? From an efficiency point of view. But I do take your point that cautious is really the way we need to go with this. And Ariel's proposal, Gavin's original proposal, is a massive quality of life improvement. Joe, go ahead.
Yes, so I share what you guys were saying, and my opinion on that is why Gavin proposes GIP is just to make the indexer life easier, to have an effective cut and then never have to worry when delegations varies, and then it will be easier for delegators to compare indexers. But that will directly impact the delegators' model. How could we protect them, and how it will affect them? But in my opinion, we already have some problems with the delegator model that needs to be fixed. So I think it's important now to devise this kind of GIP just to focus around facilitating the process for indexers. And then later we have to restudy the entire delegator model, because right now if someone delegate at the end of the allocation and the indexer can change their query cuts, and then will affect everyone rewards. And then, of course, we were talking about making the rewards liquid and the towing period. So I think there's a lot to be discussed on the delegator that needs to be assessed as a whole model together when the time comes.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah, it's a good point. I hear you, Chris. Incremental changes might be, better from a continuity perspective. At the same time, you could say, let's strike the iron while it's hot, right? And let's, put it all together, all the things that we've discussed in the past. Also, what I'm thinking of right now is what Brandon has posted in a forum post that dates back to January, I think. One part that he suggested was to have the thawing period essentially switched from the back end to the front end, which would also be a way then for delegators to be able to instantly react to bad indexing behavior, for example, and that was in fact part of what they had in mind, but there was just no time to put it in prior to protocol release. So that could be something to resurrect as an idea to factor into this year as well.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk. We're at the top of the hour here, so I'll try and just summarize here. So there's been a lot of discussion over since the beginning of the network, so since the launch, around pitfalls, shortfalls on the delegator side of things and the indexer side of things. I'm just wondering, Oliver, if we need to try and summarize that succinctly on the forums in a new post, or just succinctly summarize them in the existing post that Brandon's done, so that we can sort of refresh that conversation. I definitely agree, and it sounds like consensus here is that we should move slowly in terms of making these types of changes. The change that Ariel has suggested is quite profound in terms of how much it's going to help everyone, and what I've heard people refer to as Delegator V2 is really what I'm talking about, right? As part of that like group of changes.
And maybe we can summarize that, getting the best of both worlds, doing incremental changes without losing scope of all the things we want to do. Maybe we create a bit of a roadmap around this.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, we need to do that.
That makes a lot of sense. I think if, from a kind of change perspective, we can define a scope, a targeted scope for the change, then we can kind of evaluate, what extent of protocol level changes are required to meet that brief and to say, okay, well, if the objective here is quality of life improvements for indexes around cut management, what is the minimum that we need to do to the protocol in order to achieve that? And then we can ship these changes in an iterative pipeline that also allows more participants to feed back into the process and for us to actually, have some real world data around how these changes impact work behavior.
Agreed.
Right, we're 2 minutes over, guys. Great conversation. Thanks everybody for joining this week. We will see you next week on Office Hours.
Awesome. Have a great week, guys.
Thanks, guys.